In the Black Out Loud.
Challenge accepted. The not-for-profit sector gives more than it receives, and pressure has been building since the pandemic. How can NFPs rise to the challenge? By Susan Muldowney. This article has been edited for audio purposes. Article begins, Miriam Idris, CPA, knows how to do more with less. As CFO of Gen West, a not-for-profit organisation delivering services to redress gender inequity and help victim survivors of family violence in Melbourne's West, she is adept at making every dollar stretch. In the 2022-2023 financial year, Gen West distributed 3.4 million AUD in flexible support packages as part of its family violence service to help cover the costs associated with relocation, schooling, household appliances, and clothing. But Idris sees further challenges on the horizon, with government funding becoming increasingly competitive, especially for small to medium organizations that rely on grants to help cover their operational costs and implement programs. Funding comes with performance measures that we have to meet, says Idris, who has worked for the organization since 2010. However, it does not address other administrative expenses like finance, HR, IT, quality improvement, risk management, and compliance. We are just stretching all the time and trying to construct our resources as best we can to achieve our goals. Not-for-profits make a huge contribution to the social fabric, economy, and employment of countries across the globe. But the sector is facing significant challenges that have increased since the pandemic. The inflationary environment, rising interest rates, and the high cost of living have seen more demand for not-for-profit services, while also restricting public donations and intensifying the competition for government funding. The 10th edition of the Australian Charities Report from the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, ACNC, shows total sector revenue rose by 5.6%, or 11 billion Australian dollars, to a record high of just over 200 billion Australian dollars in the 2022 reporting period, compared to the previous period. However, this growth was outstripped by an increase in expenses of $22 billion in the same period. In other jurisdictions, such as Hong Kong, the sector is experiencing staffing and fundraising challenges in the post-pandemic era, according to a recent survey by the Hong Kong Council of Social Service. Meanwhile, in Singapore, the National Giving Study 2023 by the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Centre shows a decline in charitable donations across the city-state. Pinch points. The NFP sector is characterized by its diversity. There's a huge variation in the services they provide, from social welfare to environmental, law reform advocacy, to sporting groups and faith-based organizations. Challenges also vary across large global organizations that may employ thousands of people and small entities that may rely solely on volunteers. In Australia, for example, data from ACNC shows large charities with annual revenue of 11 million Australian dollars comprise about 0.5% of the sector, but represent 54% of its aggregate revenue. Very small charities, which have an annual revenue of less than 25,000 Australian dollars, make up a third of the sector, but operate with 0.1% of the sector's revenue. Sue Woodward AM, Commissioner of the ACNC, says that while the sector is not homogenous, it is experiencing common pinch points across the board. In the commercial business world, when you have an increase in demand, you can put up your prices, she says. It doesn't work that way in the NFP sector. ACNC data shows charities employ about 10.5% of the Australian workforce, but Woodward notes the sector is experiencing significant staffing challenges. Staffing costs in 2022 increased by almost 10% year-on-year, the highest annual percentage increase recorded. Traditionally, where the sector has not offered the highest salaries, it was often a leader in offering flexibility or part-time employment, says Woodward. But since the pandemic, more organizations are providing hybrid working arrangements and greater flexibility. So it has become harder for the sector to recruit unless they can go closer to meeting the salaries in the for-profit sector. Illy Patterson CPA, consulting CFO at Not-for-Profit Accounting Specialists, NFPAS, a South Australian accounting practice specializing in NFPs and charities, says many of her clients can see their margins shrinking almost before their eyes. It just gets tougher and tougher, says Patterson, who previously worked as finance manager for Variety, the children's charity. Wage increases are well-deserved, but they make it harder for the NFPs to operate. Payroll costs are a significant proportion of their costs, and a 3.75% wage increase really hurts. Nunzio Junta, FCPA, managing partner at Junta Bell in Victoria, an accounting practice that specializes in NFPs and charities, says many entities in the sector consist of directors or executives who are passionate about their cause, but often lack the skills or experience required to run a business. As a result, from a governance perspective, they risk getting themselves into trouble. He says, "We've walked into organizations who have a lot of money owing to the ATO because their superannuation hasn't been paid for years. We help a lot of these organizations develop strong governance and make sure they're compliant, because otherwise a lot of these passionate people will be forced to walk away from the industry." Seeking new income streams. Even charities that depend mostly on philanthropic revenue may still be feeling the squeeze, with philanthropy likely among the expenses people are cutting under cost of living pressures. Andrew Usetia, FCPA, is CFO of United in Diversity, UID, an Indonesian not-for-profit organization with a mission to serve as an educational platform and act as a catalyst for building trust and cooperation among business, the public sector, and civil society for a sustainable future. UID has galvanized leaders from all sectors to collaborate and address challenges across the nation, using Theory U as the social methodology and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, as a framework. Its sponsors include the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, the World Bank, and the United Nations Development Programme, plus a range of corporate partners. We have yielded tangible changes in policy reform, governance, social innovation, and inclusion of marginalized groups, as well as gender equality, Usetia says. This strengthens the local grassroots economy and drives business sector transformation as a key engine of sustainable development. Usetia says UID's funding model requires the organizations to be strategic in how we try to attract philanthropic funding and secure funding for the long term as well. That's one of the reasons we focus on the SDGs, he says. Diversification is also on the agenda at Gen West. As demand for services increases, Idris says the organization is seeking new funding streams. Rising to the challenge. Diversification is just one way NFPs are rising to the challenge. Junta is seeing growth in digital transformation projects to increase efficiencies. Many organizations are looking at the corporate services arm of their business and saying, how can we support service delivery with artificial intelligence, AI, automation, machine learning, and driving good decisions with the data we have, so that we're not just adding more staff? Gen West integrated its finance systems just before the pandemic, and Idris explains it now operates in the cloud. We also have an HR and payroll system that integrates with our finance system, so with the limited funds we have, we're making sure we get better technology so our staff can spend more time on their value-added work. Technology does come with a growing risk of cybersecurity, adds Idris, so this is something that we are focusing on. Governments are also stepping up measures to support the sector. In Australia, the federal government has set a goal of doubling charitable giving by the end of the decade. In Singapore, recent government initiatives include new schemes to encourage deeper partnerships between charities and businesses on volunteering, as well as tax relief and government matching on charitable donations. Patterson says that, in broad terms, her clients in the NFP sector are very determined, very resilient, very tenacious. The fact that I keep seeing people starting new charities, wanting to make a difference, wanting to find a cure for a terrible disease, wanting to find a new way to combat mental illness, or to make a difference to people who have no home. That determination is growing. They are getting more creative and productive with technology. And they are diversifying their investment strategies, looking short-term and long-term, and thinking about how their legacy can continue for decades to come.
In the Black Out Loud.